Okay, right, let's do it. Let's dig into some crypto charts again. It's the part-time trader, and this week we will be flying through some altcoin charts, and in particular, kicking off with a focus on Ethereum. Been some decent price action on Ethereum over the last couple of months, and lots of optimism growing in the space. Lots of people claiming that this is the start of a parabolic move up into the 10K region. I believe that optimism is misplaced. I think that this move up, even if it continues, will be short-lived. And today what I will do is talk you through my view that Ethereum is going to end up over the next 2 years back down in double digits and potentially as low as $80. Now that might sound crazy, but if you want to understand my rationale and if you'd like to dig into some of the thinking behind that claim, then please stick with me for the next 20 minutes or so. Right, before we kick off, obviously weekly reminder that none of this is financial advice. Clues in the name, I'm a part-time trader, so if you're looking for financial advice, don't come here. But what I am is somebody who has spent years obsessing over charts, and I think I've turned myself into a pretty smart operator in the markets. Lots of predictions I've made recently have come true, and I believe I am on the cusp of making some of my greatest ever predictions as I look for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to enter a major bear market and a historic correction in equities that will at least be on a par with what we saw back in 2008. So I am one of the few bears that are out there in the market at the moment. And if you're not familiar with my work, then please do head over to X and follow me through @PartTimeCharts. Please do hit the subscribe button if you find any of this useful. But let's kick off with Ethereum and talk through why I believe that optimism at this juncture is misplaced. So look, let's go back to basics on Ethereum, right? What we've had, back off the sort of 22 lows, which saw Bitcoin rise and make new highs in late 2024. And obviously again here in the sort of spring of summer 25. During that period, what has happened is that Ethereum has failed to make new highs, and Ethereum has massively underperformed Bitcoin in recent months. And I suppose the debate at the moment is whether that trend is shifting and Ethereum is starting to break higher, or whether actually what we're seeing, and this is my view, is the first macro lower high on Ethereum that will take us eventually into a fairly prolonged bear market that will see price, ultimately, in my view, reach back into the $80 region. But even if we just look at some of the short-term price action, so if we look at this, the weekly chart over the last couple of years, you can see that, as I say, Ethereum has struggled to make new highs while Bitcoin has. And while Bitcoin post the sort of correction that we saw in the first half of this year, over the last couple of months, Bitcoin has rallied to new highs and has taken out some of the highs that we saw in 2024, while actually at the same time, all Ethereum has managed to muster since April is a bounce back into this SR zone. So the way I'm looking at this chart, guys, is really simple, right? Number one, this big uptrend basically held positive price action on Ethereum for close to 3 years. So from June 2022 through to Feb of 2025, every time price came back into this trend line, we saw some sort of bounce. That has been broken. And so the first warning sign in my mind is that this uptrend has given way. And normally what happens is when you get a really clean uptrend that supports price for such a long time, when it breaks, it tends to be a really bad sign. And normally this kind of trend line acts as a magnet, as it has done, and eventually it gives way. So you can see that the entire move up is built on this fairly unstable foundation, whereas Bitcoin has pushed to new highs and has a much less clean market structure, I would say, than what we've seen in Ethereum, which is simply bounce along a trend line until eventually it gives way. Now, since April, we were massively oversold in April, and propped up by this sort of sloping trend line here, price bounced, and it bounced hard. We saw a big bounce on ETH BTC, and essentially any late bears on Ethereum were liquidated in brutal fashion. And what's happened in recent weeks is people have started to become increasingly optimistic and grow excited that Ethereum is at the start of a move. But it's my contention, and the argument I'll put forward today, is that this isn't the start of the move. This is actually the end of the move, because this trend line that supported price all the way up has now been back tested and is so far holding as resistance. And as you can see, this really key support and resistance level here, this pink zone at about 2,800, which was support, 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 resistance, resistance, support, resistance, is now once again being back tested as resistance. And earlier in the week, look, I'll make no bones about it, when in the UK the evening was drawing in and Ethereum was holding above this pink level, and at this point I thought, okay, there's a pretty decent chance that Ethereum is going to push higher and potentially take out some of these highs, which never, one of the things I'm often looking for in a top is a really good clean out of the previous high before price gets back under and moves to the downside. And we never quite got that on Ethereum, which is why it wouldn't have completely surprised me if price held above here, that price would push up into this $4,000 region, take out these highs in a big way, and then get back under. Now, if that happens, or if that had have happened, that would have only ever been a short-term move in my view, and inevitably I would have been predicting that price was going to roll over. And I still believe that my $80 target on Ethereum is good, and we'll come back to that in a second. But that level didn't hold earlier in the week. So when price started to hold above this level but then got rejected and the daily candle close looked like this, at that point I was saying, okay, this does not look good for Ethereum. And these highs were taken out in a big way. These sort of short-term highs here on the daily were taken out and price got back under. And I do not like the way this looks for bulls at the moment. If you are somebody who's waiting for a major correction like myself, and you're hoping to get a generational entry on crypto in the next couple of years, then this is great. But if you're holding Ethereum, if you're longing Ethereum, I just think this price structure just does not look good. Backtest of a major uptrend that has been lost, backtest of a major SR zone that once again has been lost, and to top it all off, on the daily time frame, we've got these really clean highs that have been taken out in a major way, and price has broken back into this range that we see here. So we're back inside this range. I believe that at some point that range is going to break to the downside, and we will revisit this 2,100 level. And that 2,100 level is massive. This level here, if it gives way again, that is a really clear indicator that the market wants to head lower. And that is why I've got my red trigger here, because if we get back under there, that for me will be potentially a great opportunity on a big swing short that will take us back to the lows here in the $900 region. And I expect us to take these lows out at some point in late 2025, early 2026. So look, the only way I can be short-term bullish is if we start to break back above this 2,800 level. And certainly if we get any kind of big reclaim on the weekly of this major downtrend, or major uptrend I should say, that is now being back tested as resistance, that would be a sure sign, I believe, that we're going back to the all-time highs. But right now that's not happening, and I don't like the look of these weekly candles. Big long wicks, sometimes in both directions, but increasingly what we're seeing is major rejection to the upside in this support and resistance zone. So I fail to see it. I know lots of people are bullish, and I know there are some high profile accounts that see this as a sort of right angled broadening wedge that is going to push price much higher. For me, this still looks like the first major lower high, and I believe that price is going to roll over the next couple of weeks, and we're going to come back all the way into this $900 region and take out this low here before a potential move lower. But what does that look like on an even higher time frame? So for me, this chart here is the one that I've been looking at for months, and you'll know that when this uptrend broke back in the early part of 2025, at that point I was saying that I expect price to come back into this $80 region, and I still do. I just don't think anything has changed on the bigger picture. Like I say, back test of this trend line. But ultimately, when price gets back beneath this level at 2,100, I expect it to drop like an absolute stone. And at that point, I believe the crisis will be unfolding in equity markets. You'll be seeing people flooding out of stocks and shares. The AI bubble will be over. There will be a major debt crisis that hits the bond market hard, and crypto is not going to be immune. And I keep saying this every week, guys. Like, if you really believe that crypto can survive the kind of cataclysmic event that we saw in 2008 in the stock market, then I just think you're a bit naive. I just don't see any reason to believe that if we get a major recession or stagflationary crisis, I just can't see the rationale for altcoins to do well in that environment. Perhaps you can make a case for Bitcoin being a sort of hedge against those crises. I don't even believe that will be the case. I believe Bitcoin will also get hit, but I'm almost certain that altcoins are taking their last breath before a major plunge lower. And when I look at this chart, I think, if we get back under this 2,100 zone, there is not much to support price between there and this big level at $350. And if we break back into this range, then boy oh boy, I think we could be heading as low as $80 in 2027. And from where we are, that is about a 96-97% reduction in price. And as you know, I've been calling for a correction on Bitcoin into the 3K region, which is about 95-96% from where we are today. So all of this seems to be lining up from my perspective. I know people think I'm crazy. There are a few that follow me that believe in the ideas, but many think I'm absolutely nuts or just engagement farming. Genuinely, guys, I don't know what to tell you. I really believe that we are about to see something epic in the world of altcoins, and not in the way that most people expect it. But how will I know if I'm wrong? So lots of people ask me this all the time, and the chart that I keep pointing back to is the USDC dominance chart, because if you look at the big move up in Bitcoin since the latter half of 2022, that has coincided perfectly with this downward trend on USDC dominance. And USDC dominance is basically the proportion of the market that belongs to the USDC stablecoin, which is probably the second biggest stablecoin after Tether. And so it has, for the most part, an inverse relationship with the price of Bitcoin and alts, because if USDC dominance is heading lower, then that often means that Bitcoin is heading higher, because people are cashing in their stable coins for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But I believe that we have started to see the early signs of a trend shift, having been in decline for the best part of 2 years. Recently, we've seen a flattening out in the second half of 2024 of USDC dominance, and then a pretty big move up from the lows. And I called both the move down in the latter part of 2024 and then the big move up into this region in 2025. And I've said recently that this deviation above this key SR level was probably going to take price back into this region here, but that would ultimately hold. Bitcoin and Ethereum would top out here, and we'd see a big move higher for USDC dominance. And so far, guys, that doesn't look crazy, because this support and resistance zone is holding. I do believe there are signs that Bitcoin and Ethereum are topping out. And if this starts to move up in the way that I've suggested on this chart, then I'm sorry, but altcoins are in massive trouble. Bitcoin too, but altcoins are going to get absolutely obliterated. So when people ask me, how will you know if you're wrong? Where's your invalidation? Quite simply, if we get a weekly close back down here beneath this SR level, then I think it's likely that USDC dominance comes back into this region. And in such a scenario, in this red scenario, I think Bitcoin and Ethereum and other altcoins will probably do really, really well. But so far, I am not seeing any evidence that will be the case. This is holding, and if it continues to hold, and certainly if price breaks back above this key resistance zone here, then I think it's good night for the cryptocurrency bulls. I genuinely believe this market is going to shock people in terms of the depths that prices are going to plunge to in the next couple of years. What other clues are there though? So one clue that I'm right on Ethereum is USDC dominance and the state of the stablecoin market. There are some much simpler clues in the equity market right now. The first is, this is the long-term 100-year chart of the S&P 500. And look at where we are. So I've been saying since very late 2024 that the market has topped out and we're going to see a major correction where I can see equities, genuinely anywhere from 50 to 75% down over the coming years. And I know we've had a big bounce recently, but how significant is that in the grand scheme of things? I mean, really, with everything that's going on in the market, I've talked about the longest and deepest yield curve inversion we've ever experienced. I've talked about the absolute weakness in the bond market, the fact that rates are stubbornly high, the pressure that is going to put on consumers, and in particular on nation states who just will not be able to monetize debt in the way that they have done and print money without causing real pain for inflation to their citizens. So central banks are snookered. I don't believe there's much wriggle room. And in that scenario, coupled with the fact that we are at a 100-year long resistance here on the S&P 500, I just think it's bonkers to be optimistic about this market right now. Things are overvalued. You can go and look at things like the Buffett indicator. We are at historic levels of overvaluation, particularly in the technology space, which has driven a lot of this move up in recent years. And we're seeing big flashing red lights, big warning signals in the macroeconomy that things are messy right now. So betting on altcoins here just seems bonkers to me. And I know, obviously there will be people that will say that this is a V-shaped recovery, that we saw a really steep sell-off and prices just bounced back towards the highs. And that's fine, but I wouldn't get too excited about that, honestly, because we've seen this before. We saw pretty sharp, rapid sell-off in the S&P 500 at the beginning of the 2008 financial crisis. And what happened? The bull stepped in and this got bought back up, and this 12% decline was completely eaten away. And in fact, price made a nominal new high. But what happened afterwards? And you can just imagine the sentiment here as price bounces back. Anybody that was bearish was being mocked, and the bulls were in charge, and price was going to continue to push up. But this was the point of maximum risk, and barely anybody would spot it. And there's a reason why this kind of bounce is often called the complacency bounce. And it's because the emotion that people experience on the way down here is then completely countered by the sense of relief that investors experience and the FOMO that people who are sidelined experience as price bounces back into the highs. But what often happens is, and what can happen, particularly in a time of real crisis, is that this is the worst time to get sucked into the market. And I believe that that is where we are now. I believe this is analogous to the point where price started to roll over in 07-08 into the great financial crisis. And I genuinely believe that if you're buying up here, you're going to be really disappointed over the next couple of years, because I think we are in for a correction that could possibly take us back to this major uptrend support, which would be a correction somewhere in the region of about 70 to 75%. But even if we don't get there, even if we just come back in and take out this COVID low, I still think you're talking about 50 to 60% correction on the S&P. And it's a similar story on the NASDAQ. Like this, I've been saying for months that this bullish or this structure that supported price all the way through 2020 and into late 2021 eventually gave way. And I think this is just a bigger version of that over the last couple of years. So yes, price has been pushing higher, but when I see price supported consistently by a pretty uniform trend line, I'm always waiting for that to break. And I just don't believe this is the stable foundation for a really kind of parabolic move to the upside. I think these are the dying embers of a bull market, and this is the complacency bounce, the dead cat bounce, the move that sucks everybody into believing that it's all fine, everything's going to push higher, the bears are idiots. A phrase I keep hearing is bears sound smart but bulls make money. Well, good luck making money if you're buying up here, because genuinely I think this market is heading much, much, much lower. I believe by 2027 the Nasdaq will be trading somewhere in the region of about $6,000 to $7,000. Now, people can call me crazy, but you have to have a short memory if you cannot remember, or either a short memory, or you have to be really, really young if you cannot remember a time when equity suffered a major correction. And I know things have been, all good for quite some time now after the big scare in 2022, but that doesn't mean they're going to stay good forever. And for me, I'm waiting to get positioned much, much lower and looking for prices. And let me remind you, the funny thing about this, right? So if I'm calling for a move back into the $6,000 region, yes, that's a 70% decline, but it only takes us back to the COVID lows before all that money got printed, before central banks took rates to zero back in 2020. That's not that long ago. We're talking about price reverting to where it was 5 years ago before all that funny money got thrown into the market. So it might sound bonkers, but in real terms, it's actually not that crazy that at these kind of overvaluations, we could see a major correction. So look, these are some of the clues that I'm piecing together, whether it's stablecoin dominance, whether it's the state of the equity market. I'm thinking about what is there out there to either validate or disprove my thesis on Ethereum. And so far, a lot of what I'm finding is really chiming with the idea that Ethereum could crash significantly. Because look, let's be honest, guys, I think a lot of us have been in the altcoin space for a long time. Some of these projects have zero intrinsic value. I mean, look, Bitcoin has a great narrative. It's a store of value, and I think it's battle worn. It's proven itself over a long period of time. But something like Ethereum has had the best part of a decade to actually demonstrate any real use case, and I can't think of one. I mean, other than ferrying money around, ferrying stable coins around on the network to buy pointless meme coins, I can't think of a single reason why anybody would need to own Ethereum in the future. And that's a problem, because if we hit a crisis, people are going to completely lose faith with it. It's going to be sold off at record levels. And the kind of illiquidity that produces some of these massive moves to the upside will be the same illiquidity that produces a huge move to the downside. So for me, $80 Ethereum is what I'm looking for. I think the stablecoin market and the charts that I'm looking at in the indexes and in the equity space both point to some major problems on the horizon. There's another clue, which is ETH BTC. And again, this was a prediction I made. This blue squiggly line was a prediction I made back in late 2024, where I said that despite many continuously calling for the bottom and wanting price to head higher, I said ETH BTC would not bottom until it reaches this region. That actually happened a lot quicker than I thought it would. But look at where we are. This big support and resistance zone here, which has held price either as resistance or support all the way back to 2017, has now been broken, and it's been back tested as resistance now. So I believe we are going to go through some sort of accumulation period here on ETH BTC before, as the crisis comes to an end, before price breaks much higher. So long term, I'm massively bullish on alts, and I think Ethereum will be one that outperforms Bitcoin, but I just don't think that time is coming for at least a year, possibly two. And during that period, I expect some consolidation on the ETH BTC pair, and I expect Ethereum in US dollar terms to essentially follow Bitcoin into a major decline. Other clues. So this is Solana versus Ethereum, and it's one of the things I feel most confident about in the crypto space at the moment, that Solana has topped versus Ethereum and versus Bitcoin. And you can check back on some of my other videos for some of my analysis on Solana, and in particular the USD and the BTC pairs for Solana. But this is Solana versus Ethereum. Excuse me. And what you can see is we've had this rising wedge pattern, this rising channel for the last year and a half, and that has finally started to break down. And I've predicted for a long time that we're going to see a pretty shocking crash in Solana versus Ethereum. And so not only has this upward sort of rising wedge structure broken now, we're back once again retesting this horizontal support and resistance zone. And if all of this turns out to be a false breakout, a big deviation, then I think we are heading back to ultimately the range lows down here over the next couple of years, as indicated by this blue squiggle. So this is something I feel really confident about. Solana has topped versus Ethereum. Now, many people see this as bullish for Ethereum, but what I've been doing recently is reminding people that the last time that Solana, which was a market leader in 2021 and again in 23 and 24, you know, the big move that we've seen on Ethereum, on Solana, over the last couple of years, meant that it was one of the coins that produced the most impressive gains, particularly among the majors. But the last time that Solana topped out versus Ethereum was back here. And look at what happened to Ethereum then. So the last time Solana topped out versus Ethereum, Ethereum also topped out. And we saw a major decline, I think in the region of about 85% over the next year. And so if you're cheerleading for Ethereum here because Solana ETH has just broken down, you may just want to rethink your position, because I believe that actually Ethereum is also topping out here and putting in its first major lower high, as I mentioned back here. And as this pair rolls over, so too will Ethereum. It's just that Solana is going to get hit even harder. So some pretty shocking times ahead in my view for Ethereum, and also for Solana, even more so for Solana. And when I look at some of the other coins in the space, I also see no reason to be bullish at all on altcoins. So this is the prediction that I made on AVAX way back when it was $50. Price now sits at $19. You know, people like to mock and claim that I'm a bear that is engagement farming, but you know, we're already 60% down, and I think we're going much lower. But even just from a simple structural perspective, going back to the basics, guys, what are the things that you're looking for in a market that has some strength to it? You're looking for higher highs and higher lows. And what are we getting at the moment? We've got, on a macro basis, we've got high, a lower high, a lower high, a lower high, you know, and once we start to make some clean lower lows, once this level breaks, I think the downside acceleration is going to come pretty quickly. And at some point over the next couple of years, I expect AVAX to be trading in and around the $1 region. So I don't see it. People are calling for alt season all the time. People are claiming that this is all an accumulation period. Alts are about to go berserk. Everybody's going to get rich. I just don't see it. I don't think the macro supports that. I think equities are flashing big red warning signs. And I believe that the really simple structure on a lot of these altcoins just points to much more downside. And by the time we get down here, I expect most people will be disinterested, wiped out. They will have lost everything in crypto. And that is going to be, in my opinion, the point of maximum return before we see some of these altcoins go truly parabolic in the years to come. And another one that I see in similar fashion to that is XRP. Now, remember, I called the top back here in early 2025. And I predicted at that point that price would come back into this 10 cents, 11 cents region before going on a major run. Now, people have mocked me about this post. And so far, look, in fairness to the bulls, so far, this big SR zone here seems to have held a support. Price has got bought up, but there's not been much of a rally. I mean, over the last couple of months, Bitcoin has gone back up and taken out its previous high. XRP's got nowhere near that, and we're already coming back into this support and resistance zone again. And I believe when it gets retested for a second time, I don't think it's going to hold. And as I've been saying for a while, any break below this level in my mind would be the red trigger for a big swing short. And once we're back under this level, I mean, look, for a start, look at all this inefficiency here. All of that is going to get eaten up. I think price will plummet. Literally in a matter of days, I could see us coming back into this region here, which is a 75% decline, and then a slow bleed back into 11, 10 cents would make a lot of sense for me. And in hindsight, I believe that all of this starts to look like one massive accumulation range. And this is where I start to get bullish on the future, because while I think price is going to get battered into 26 and 27, eventually I think there are going to be some really exciting opportunities. And in hindsight, you know, in the 2030s, you'll look back and I believe that you'll look at all of this as one big range. You know, essentially one big reaccumulation range after the big moves of 2017, and buying these lows here will potentially make me very, very wealthy if this plays out. And from a technical perspective, a measured move the size of this range, once we break to the upside, gives us a price of about $80. If you're buying in the 10 cents region, you know, these are astronomical gains. And I know there's a long way to go, and I'm more confident about the move down than I am the move back up. But boy, oh boy, if we get down here, that is a great buying opportunity. And so once again, you know, I am looking for a 95%-ish move to the downside in a crisis before we get real liftoff. And I believe the kind of moves in alts that people have been praying for the last couple of years actually start to materialize. So that is where I will end this week. You know, nothing has changed for me. I do believe that the altcoin market is going to get blown apart. And I know people are excited on every bounce on the daily. For me, I'm not bothered about what happens today, tomorrow, next week, or even next month. I'm looking at the bigger picture, and I truly believe there is historic downside ahead for alts, and that we are going to enter a major, major crisis that is going to blow a lot of investors completely out of the water. So that's just how I'm playing it. None of this is financial advice. You need to do your own research and come to your own conclusions. But if you have found any of this useful, if you find the channel entertaining, informative, or even if you just fancy coming back in a year's time to mock me when crypto prices are higher in your view, I don't believe that will be the case, but if you do, then please smash the subscribe button, help me grow the channel, and hopefully I can bring you more content in the future. But thanks for staying with me today. It's been good to talk you through some of the moves that I see ahead in the altcoin market. And like I say, please do hit me up on @PartTimeCharts over on X.